Okay, let me position the microphone. Hope everyone is having a great start of the 2024 year. Sorry, I was busy getting all these tabs ready. So we have the South Korean opposition leader Lee Jae-myung stabbed, and let's play this quickly. Another brutal video on X you won't see anywhere else. Whether this relates to Taiwan being invaded or not, I have no idea, but it seems like there's been a lot of chaos in Asia lately, especially with the earthquakes in Japan and this, and then there's been a lot of world leaders being exposed to this kind of attack. And I also wanted to bring up the fact that we've had a lot of talk lately about these secretaries of state, and then you have these media pundits come on like Glenn Kirshner to defend them. Let's just play a little bit of this.
Trump announces to his supporters that he has a new enemy, and the threats start pouring in. How many times are we going to watch this movie, watch this pattern repeat itself?
So yeah, they're talking about the same pattern. It's because the mainstream media is really trying to create drama and create the conditions necessary for something like this. And anyone in a position of authority who makes a very consequential decision, just like Sheena Bellows or the Secretary of State in Colorado, they're going to get criticism. And then women, especially millennial women, will turn this into this desperate need for attention. And that's exactly what they've done. And then you have the Glenn Kirshners of the world come on and perpetuate this attention seeking and make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can see how this builds. And the more that they cover this, it's, you know, the more that it becomes self-perpetuating in a sense.
Before we finally act to put a stop to it. Let's talk about that.
So, you know, when they say put a stop to it, what they really mean is end the First Amendment, prevent people from speaking, censor as many Trump supporters as they possibly can. And again, this started in 2015 and 2016 when Trump won the presidency. And, you know, it's had its peaks and valleys, of course, but it's really ramping up again. And, you know, Glenn Kirshner is unbelievably unethical.
Because justice matters. State Bellows acted in accordance with Maine's election laws because she upheld her oath of office and she disqualified Donald Trump from the Maine ballot. So, of course, here is what Donald Trump and his attack dog spokesperson began saying about Secretary of State Bellows. MAGA meltdown as Trump sicks Truth Social fans on Maine.
It's all Trump's fault, right?
Secretary of State who booted him off ballot. Trump posts Secretary of State Shannon Bellows' website after she ruled.
Okay, so I'm being sarcastic clearly, but you know, Trump posts a couple articles and the Secretary of State website, which is a public website, on his own True Social feed, and now they're claiming it's all Trump's fault. Mind you, Trump gets tons of criticism, and anything that Sheena Bello gets, Trump is getting, 1,000-fold. And you don't hear Trump complaining, do you?
He is ineligible under the 14th Amendment. Trump has.
And you don't hear a lot of the senators complaining who are male either about the hate mail that they get. But as soon as it's the Secretary of State and as soon as they're removing Trump off the ballot, they're getting so much hate mail.
Has yet to comment on the removal, but took to Truth.
And the truth is, of the thousands of hate mail messages that they've probably received, and when I say hate mail, I'm just talking about strong criticism, they'll pick out the needle in the haystack, some, paranoid schizophrenic who is mentally ill, and they'll somehow try to characterize basically this whole heap of hate mail as, that one mentally ill message.
Truth Social Thursday night to direct his followers to Bello's official website. But you know what? Trump's spokesperson already attacked Secretary of State Bellows. Trump campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung said in a statement after the decision, "We will quickly file a legal objection in state court to prevent this atrocious decision in Maine from taking effect." And he, Stephen Chung, also called Bellows, a former ACLU attorney, a virulent leftist, and a hyper-partisan Biden-supporting Democrat who has decided to interfere in the presidential election on behalf of crooked Joe Biden. So,
how is any of that illegal? What's wrong with Glenn Kirshner here? I'm starting to think that he is completely deranged.
of course, Donald Trump's supporters knew exactly what to
Oh, it's all Trump supporters, right? Blame shift.
do. Maine's Secretary of State says she was threatened for ejecting Trump from.
I mean, what do you expect? Do you think that when you're taking a major political candidate off the ballot illegally, she's actually engaging in a felony here, and she'll never be prosecuted because she's going to use the whether it's prosecutorial or qualified immunity that she has, she'll use that as a state official. But it technically speaking, it is a felony and it is a violation of civil rights to remove a leading political candidate off the ballot. And she thinks that she's going to get just a bunch of love mail from people. I mean, she's obviously not in touch with reality if she thinks that, she's not going to get some criticism from a lot of people around the country.
Ballot. Maine.
That's one reason why it's really good to live stream, especially some of the criticism, because then they can't misrepresent exactly what you're saying.
Secretary of State Shannon Bellows said in an interview that she has faced threats.
Shame on Glenn Kirshner for, no pun intended, trumpeting up all this drama that these secretaries of state are using.
Since issuing her decision to remove Donald Trump from the state's primary ballot on Thursday. Quote, "We have received threatening communications. Those are unacceptable," Bellows told CNN's Caitlin Collins on Friday. "I certainly worry about the safety of people."
I mean, whatever happened to protest? when it's a radical leftist, especially if it's a woman like Sheena Bellows, and that's another reason that they put these women in these positions, is because then they can cite this, fear that they potentially have or don't have. I mean, I typically think that they don't actually have this fear that they suggest that they do have, but I think it's all an act. But you can never really know what other people are thinking, of course. I'm not saying that I know what she's thinking, but I'm telling you what I think. And it's really despicable. It's like it's just cowardly.
People I love, people around me, and people who are charged with protecting me.
But these radical leftists don't have any respect for protest, criticism, feedback, and they think that legitimate protest, when it comes in contrast to whatever decision that they've made that has caused the uproar, they believe that it just shouldn't exist, or it's illegal, or it's causing them fear, and it's pure theater. You could tell that Sheena Bellows would probably have more success as like a community sort of actress or something, rather than a Secretary of State.
And working alongside me. That being said, we're a nation of laws, and that's what's really
Because I don't honestly know if she could get elected as dog catcher in Maine.
important. I've been laser focused on that obligation to uphold the Constitution. And Secretary of State Bellows' home was swatted.
That's interesting, though. So they're talking a lot about a bunch of people being swatted lately. And for some, I've been reverse swatted, where people who are extremely powerful have created a hoax. And it is terrifying. And I would not, I honestly would not wish that on anyone. And anyone doing this should be prosecuted. However, there's this double standard, like I mentioned, with the reverse SWAT, when you're dealing with people who are in positions of power and they call in hoaxes, there's absolutely no prosecution for them. And this is the erosion of the rule of law in this country. And, if you're going to prosecute these mentally ill, deranged people on the internet who are swatting people, I think there's got to be some serious structural changes in the way that law enforcement responds to these. I think they're legally obligated, more or less, to actually go physically to wherever the house is or whatever, the residence, and check out what's actually going on. But I think that there's, I'm not an expert on this particular issue, but I think there could be some changes where they may not need to be legally obligated to go out there. So you lessen the cost of the actual response. Meanwhile, I think there needs to be some major changes in the way that these cases are prosecuted, because, I think that it stems from people losing complete faith in the legal system. As I mentioned, people in positions of power are never held accountable.
Maine Secretary of State targeted with swatting call after ruling Trump ineligible for ballot. The incident happened.
But, again, who knows if this is actually real? I've never said that it's real. I'm just saying that they're reporting it.
The day after Shannon Bellows, a Democrat, ruled
In fact,
former
it
President
could
Donald
potentially
Trump
just be fake and, a law enforcement bullshit story.
is constitutionally ineligible to appear on the state's property. Said he had broken into someone acting in a Republican witnesses.
You know, the first person I would suspect of doing something like this, meaning calling in a swatting, would be Glenn Kirshner. I'm sure he's probably involved in some of those.
Who are expected to testify at the Trump.
He's the kind of arrogant asshole who probably thinks that he can get away with something like that.
Trials. So, friends, we need to keep calling on the institutions of.
See, keep calling. Exactly. That must have been one of his Freudian slips.
Government and the good men and women who populate them to stop forcing our nation to watch this movie on an endless loop.
He is such an establishment goon.
Someone tries to hold.
He is just trying to apply as much pressure to local authorities to take action against fundamental rights. That's all he's trying to do right now. Can barely stand him. Okay, so we have the South Korea situation. A couple other stories here. We got the Taiwan invasion. So this all is building towards what many believe, especially with Joe Biden in office, only for another 10 months. China is really going to make a decision right now within the next few weeks, because spring is right around the corner, believe it or not. It's the 1st of January. So from a military perspective, logistically, the supply chain, they got to think 3 months ahead, right? And there's been troop buildups. There's been supply and cargo buildups. And especially considering the fact that, as I talked about this morning, we have, and it's right here, the Civil Reserve Air Fleet in this country was just activated by Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary. And in order to activate and compel local air carriers to act on behalf of the U.S. military, to mobilize troops around the country, it takes a lot of effort. It's a big act. And you know, it's you never really know if, you know, maybe China has some meteorological HARP type of weapon to kind of test whether or not one of these tsunamis against China, against Japan, against Taiwan, and just kind of test to see the local response from its own government, to test whether or not it has adequate defenses, to test whether or not this is actually taking out any naval assets. So that should always be in the back of your head. And, you know, we're also looking at the situation here in South Korea that we began the stream with. So it's all sort of building towards this crescendo of an invasion of Taiwan by China. All right, let's play this.
Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know what's interesting?
This is really good. And there's some clips in here from Joe Biden in the 70s or 80s that are real gems.
Thing about Joe Biden, throughout the 50 years of his career in Washington, he's pretty much admitted everything. You know, I've played so many flashbacks of Joe Biden from 5 years ago all the way to 40 years ago, when he was a young up-and-coming politician, almost like the AOC of the time in a way. But anyways, when you spend that much time in public...
It is interesting. So this Liberal Hive Mind channel did a fantastic job actually grabbing this material. And, you know, Joe Biden said some really interesting things that I hadn't heard before. One was that he felt like he was selected because of his age. And in this interview, he's 28. So, you know, however many years ago that was, where I think, you know, he was running this campaign for Senate in Delaware at the time. And I don't know if he won the first time around or not.
Life, when you spend that much time doing interviews and just speaking in general, a lot of what you say gets recorded and documented, and with Sleepy Joe, it's become a little bit of an issue. These Biden flashback moments are constantly appearing, and every single time they give us deep insight into how much of a piece of work this guy really is. Folks, there should have never been any surprises with Sleepy Creepy Joe because he basically is on the record admitting everything. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright friends, so here's a clip that you probably haven't seen before. Here's Joe Biden, I think in the 1980s, although it's possible it's in the 70s.
I wonder
Just
where he
take a
got
look at what
this.
he had to say.
Senator Biden, it's nice to have you here. As the youngest member of the Senate, the one, therefore, who may expect the longest career there, I wonder if you'd say to us, since it's clear that you're not corrupt...
Okay, so yeah, he's already been elected into the Senate.
Got elected. Why should people think that the system produces corrupt results when there you are?
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that.
What? He said, I'm not sure that you should assume that I am not corrupt.
The system does produce corruption, and I think implicit in the system is corruption, when in fact, whether or not you can run for public office, and it costs a great...
You know those ink blot tests? If you're doing some sort of like psychological exam, they give you like once or twice in your lifetime or whatever. The fact that Joe Biden immediately assumes that the system is corrupt, and it is, the system is corrupt. But if you're in the Senate and you're 28 years old and you've just been elected and you believe the system is corrupt, and you're talking about your own role in it, I think this should tell you a lot about his sort of worldview and how he went about his time in the Senate.
Great deal of money to run for the United States Senate, even from a small state like Delaware. You have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something. We were told that we politicians, as the young kids say, rip off the American public. I think the American public, in a way, rips off we politicians by forcing us to run the way they do. To raise $300,000.
That should also tell you what he thinks of the American public.
Is no mean feat. And unless you happen to be some sort of anomaly, like myself, being a 29-year-old candidate and can attract some attention beyond your own state, it's very difficult to raise that money from a large group of people. I'm a 29-year-old oddball. The only reason I was able to raise the money is I was able to have a national constituency to run for office. Because I was 29, I'm like the token black or the token woman. I was the token young person. I went to the big guys.
I didn't know this before this clip. And I guess, you know, when you really think about it, how did Joe Biden become a senator? You know, he just came out of nowhere at 28 years old. He's not particularly bright. Usually, you know, if you're 28 or 29, I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy is legitimately intelligent, and although, you know, he's been involved, I'm talking about Ramaswamy, has been involved in a lot of corrupt pharma deals. He's 37, maybe 36. And he's now just kind of making this jump into politics. Even Pete Buttigieg, right? He's 41, 42. So, I mean, it is exceedingly rare, right? To be a senator at 29 years old. You never see that. Never. And you would have to be either from a very powerful family, which he's not, or incredibly lucky and incredibly talented, which he's not talented. There's something else going on. And I think everybody, after you kind of do this deduction, can figure out he made some very, very unseemly, corrupt, and unbelievably unethical deals in order to be able to campaign at that age.
For the money. I was ready to prostitute myself in the manner in which
Oh,
I
what?
talked about it. But what happened was
Prostitute yourself? Are you kidding me?
they said, come back when you're 40, son.
Joe Biden essentially admits the quiet part out loud. He started off by saying, I don't know if you should assume that I'm not corrupt, and trust me, Joe, we certainly don't assume that. But then essentially confirms later on that he did in fact attempt to prostitute himself politically to the highest bidder, but they were
This is such a good clip. Again, I wonder where liberal hive mind found this. I'm sure it's out there, but it's been memory hold, so these things can take time. He probably went into an archive or something.
refused to engage with his campaign because he was supposedly too young, telling him to come back when he was 40. He admits it. He admits that he is a typical Washington swamp creature, and he always has been. He said that decades ago, and it's crazy how accurate it's become, huh? I mean, if you really think about it, it feels like political prostitution is kind of the business model of the Biden family as a whole. In another moment during that same interview, he talks about how you have to change your policies and change your speech depending on who you're addressing or depending on who's funding your campaign.
If in fact you know that the only way you can raise any money to get to run for public office is to go to vested interest groups, then in fact you're put in the position that you have to begin to wonder whether or not you prostitute the ideas that you have about government in order to get the money to begin to run.
And again, what it seems like is Joe Biden ahead of time essentially describing his philosophy. You know, I think what he was trying to do during that interview was essentially describe the broken system of American elections and government in an attempt to take the high road and portray himself as non-corrupt and above it all. But of course, fast forward a couple decades later, and it's basically like Joe Biden's political prophecy. Joe Biden is the king of fake promises. Joe Biden is the king of saying whatever he has to say in front of the crowd that he's speaking to. You know, that's where the kooky Uncle Joe stories come from, right? The man's literally invented BS stories. He just writes fiction of himself to paint himself as a hero in front of whatever lobbyist group that he's speaking to, generally unions, right? Well, of course, he'll pull out the union shtick whenever necessary. Why? Well, isn't it obvious? They have influence over his campaign. Joe Biden became the exact thing that the interviewer at the time was essentially implying. A lifelong career in Washington. Joe Biden laughed at that idea during that flashback clip, but that's exactly what ended up happening. Going to Washington and making a lifelong career out of it. There's no term limit, so why blame him? When you can enrich your family to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, never having to work a day in your life, all you gotta do is sell your soul to the highest bidder. That's exactly who Joe Biden is. Here's a great example at opensecrets.org.
There's another screenshot in here of FTX's donations to the Biden campaign, and that's actually really good.
2020 presidential race, let's take a look at the top contributors to Joe Biden's presidential campaign, and specifically let's look at these two right over here. Joe Biden received $5.2
Oh, here we go. Yeah, this is it. So Joe Biden received, like $11.4 million from SBF here, Alameda Research and FTX US. I did a quick search on Google to see if Joe Biden had disavowed these donations and maybe given them back to the bankruptcy, or allowed the bankruptcy trustee to claw these funds back, or even given them to charity. And I can't find anything that Joe Biden actually did that. Now, maybe Joe Biden did, and I couldn't find it in the limited search that I did. But, I would say probability maybe 80% that he kept all of this money, $11.4 million. Now, that is pure theft. Joe Biden is stealing from you. If you had any funds whatsoever deposited into FTX, that means they went into Joe Biden's wallet. And he is, an accessory to the entire campaign finance fraud, and probably one of the major reasons why the U.S. Attorney's Office dropped the second trial against SBF, which they did a couple days ago that we found out about. And whether or not Lewis Kaplan, the federal judge presiding over the case, allows this to happen is still a question. It's an open question. Danielle Sassoon, the lead, I think she's withdrawn from the case. Could be wrong about that, but I've seen the recent pleadings done by another AUSA, and maybe the other case was chiefly led by a different AUSA all along. But Lewis Kaplan could put his foot down here and potentially deny the prosecutor's request here and go forward with the second trial. So, we'll see what happens, but, odds are, of course, again, probably 95% chance that we never see a second trial here, and that Lewis Kaplan, the federal judge, gives in to the U.S. Attorney's Office. But, this is just right in front of your face. He's laughing at you. He's stealing your money. This kind of reminds me of when Mt. Gox went down and I had $2,000 in that exchange. Lost it forever. A couple days ago, I saw a couple press releases that they were actually now 10 years later, 12 years later, giving money back to the original account holders. I haven't received anything, so.
And campaign donations from FTX.us and $6.2 million.
And mind you,
Alameda Research.
that would have been like 4 Bitcoins 12 years ago, probably even more than that. And, I was really, and it was back in those days, it was a little bit more difficult to buy Bitcoin. That's why I was using Mt. Gox. So let's see. Let's just say 4 Bitcoins at current market value. That would have been $200K.
Research. Those are Sam Bankman-Fried's former corporate entities. Of course, we know how that ended, right?
Everything is rigged.
Fried is facing
Everything is
life in
fake.
prison for running.
There is absolutely no way, regardless of how hard you work, how hard you try, there is no way that you can get ahead. Every time you do, if you're a white male in this country, the government will steal from you, in this case, Joe Biden. They will rig everything to make it incredibly difficult to own property. Good luck getting a 30-year fixed mortgage right now. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. I think, there's some more in this video, but we'll just leave it at that. Oh, we got the Ukraine stuff here on the back end of this video. Okay, so Agent X was telling me about this Midas Touch video here. And we have Eli Honig from CNN arguing with Karen Friedman Agnifilo about the Letitia James supported prosecution in New York, and even a little bit about Alvin Bragg as well. And as I mentioned earlier this morning, Karen Friedman's constant droning on about Jack Smith or Alvin Bragg or even Letitia James is a conflict of interest, considering the fact that she had previously worked with these individuals. It's actually very sickening. But so usually these talking heads from CNN will agree with all this radical agenda bullshit. And Eli Honig actually comes in here and criticizes Letitia James as well as Alvin Bragg a little bit. I mean, he should have went way harder, but he was also trying to be friendly to Karen Friedman. And, you know, the tabloid, also known as Midas Touch, this is probably the most interesting video that they've done in a while. And I hate watching these videos from Midas Touch, but I do watch clips of pretty much every video that they release, and just to kind of get an idea of what they're talking about. And, you know, out of all the videos that I've unfortunately had to be exposed to from Midas Inappropriate Touch, this video is probably, like I said, not only the most interesting, but we had some disagreement. We had some actual debate. And we had some ethics brought up. And it's almost like, you know, the way that I saw this was Karen Friedman thinks that you can prosecute anything, and that anything that can be prosecuted should be prosecuted. So it makes anything into a crime. And this is, you know, the low IQ, bottom of your law school class graduation, 1.7 GPA kind of, you know, outlook on these cases. And that, unfortunately, a lot of these state and local prosecutors are the worst performing lawyers that exist. They're typically employed because of the fact that they graduated at the bottom of their class. They can't get a job doing any litigation anywhere else. And you have this stark contrast to Eli Honig here, who actually brought up some good points about Letitia James using the trial and using this prosecution as a platform to fundraise from and to elect herself as the state attorney general, and, you know, the run for governor as well.
They're infamously making sure that people get killed and people die and people are, you know, just all the terrible things that the mafia used to do. And let's say if there is something to
So they're kind of comparing Trump to a mob boss.
nail them on, then do it. If there isn't, there isn't. I mean, that's the thing.
Well, that's a separate
I
question.
don't have a problem.
That's a separate
with it.
question. That's not a response, though. Saying, well, she turned out to be right. I mean, both of those things can be true. It's inappropriate to campaign for elected prosecutorial or prosecutorial-like office by promising to nail a certain person before you have access to one piece of evidence. That's where I have a problem.
By the way, you know, you notice how trashy Eli Honig looks without the CNN makeup crew?
The case itself, I think, it's a fair argument that this case is justified. I think there's arguments both ways. And I also, Donald Trump is not this case does not by any means make Donald Trump out to be the Al Capone of fraud. I mean, that is.
Okay, so
he is not the leading fraud. Look, Donald Trump definitely vastly overinflated his numbers. There are fraudsters, you know this, Karen. There are fraudsters all over the state of New York who are stealing money from vulnerable people, from senior citizens, from government funds. What Donald Trump did here, yes, his numbers are ridiculous. It meets the technical requirements of fraud, no doubt.
I disagree with that. I really do.
But let's also be real. He's making these representations to very sophisticated players, banks, who can do their own due diligence, made him the loans that were by and large, A, repaid, B, with interest. And this, by the way, I think is a reason nobody was willing to charge it criminally. So it's simply not fair to say he's the Al Capone of fraud based on this case. This is a borderline for people. Prosecutors charge fraud cases all day where there's actual victims put out of house and home, lost money out of pocket. This is not that. This is a fraud case. It's got its strengths. It's not its weaknesses, but he's not the person you would pick out as the biggest fraudster in the entire state by any means.
So I understand that you can make that argument. I don't think anyone is necessarily saying that he's the biggest fraudster, but he has amassed a New York-based enterprise, largely New York-based enterprise, based on lies. And I think if you read Judge Engoron's most recent 3-page, really short motion to dismiss, or opinion on the 5th motion to dismiss that Trump filed, he really outlines and justifies why it's not just fraud, it's persistent fraud, and why it's not just because the numbers are overvalued or undervalued. It's because of the number of lies that they put into the math equation to come up with the numbers, right? And it's things like tripling the size of an apartment, or saying that it's all 100% occupied when it's not, or saying that it's not rent controlled when it is, or all of the different just lies that went into it. And it's the cumulative number of lies that allowed him to build the foundation and the money and the empire. And it's just, it's about leveling the playing field.
I agree with all you just said. I did a case when I was in New York, I was a second or third year, involving a woman who was basically she found 10 or 12 senior citizens and lied to them and defrauded them and stole their.
Oh, by the way, this is also incredibly unethical for Eli Honig to talk about this particular case. I realize that he's kind of obfuscating some of the details of the parties, but
essentially life savings. What's a more serious? What case of fraud concerns you more, Donald Trump or that one? Donald Trump lying to get loans from banks, repaying those loans with interest.
I mean, this is a really simple question.
Or this run-of-the-mill person who stole money from senior citizens and left them broke.
That's a good question.
Who's worse? Which is a worse fraud?
I think that the one you just said is probably worse. I don't know how you.
What do you mean probably? What do you mean probably? First of all, I disagree completely. I'm gonna not actually click, and I just want to collect my thoughts here and just talk without actually trying to produce a stream, so I can have a good stream of consciousness. And I have personally worked in banking in various capacities, generally, obviously, as a software developer. When I say various capacities, whether that's as a developer or more of a senior developer / lead developer, and even lately kind of as a software architect, right? And I've been exposed to a lot of financial products. And in 2010, around that time period, I worked at Wells Fargo, which is the largest servicer of home mortgages in the country, probably the world. And they have these huge divisions during this period. And this is another thing of Indian software engineers. And the reason that they do this, they bring in these H-1Bs, is because the bank then has plausible deniability. They can then ship them all back to India and no one knows anything about these particular loans. And the loans that we were looking at was related to mortgage modification in 2010. And the real fraud going on is by these hedge funds who have bought mortgages for pennies on the dollar and then resold them and repackaged them and made billions and billions of dollars off of this fraud that no one else has access to because they don't have the kind of money that hedge funds have. We're talking about Goldman Sachs. We're talking about JP Morgan. When Bear Stearns went down, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs came in and literally bought these mortgages that were packaged together for 5 or 10 cents on the dollar. So let's theoretically say that one of the mortgages was worth $100,000. They could have easily bought it for $5,000 or $10,000. Meanwhile, if the person was still in the house or the family was still in the house, they were still making payments on the $100,000 for many years, whether that's 15, 30-year mortgage, generally a 30-year mortgage, right? And, you know, I think, I don't know that much about this, but I think this is another reason why some of these hedge funds came in and tried to buy homes throughout the country and then rent them out through management companies. I think the whole mortgage modification Obama regime had something to do with that. But that's where the real fraud is, hedge funds. You know, representing Trump Tower and getting the numbers off a little bit is absolutely not fraud.
What are you defining worse for what point?
My point is not that what Donald Trump did is okay. My point is the analogy where the excuse for Letitia James, that all she's doing is identifying the leading player in a major problem in Donald Trump, the biggest fraudster in New York.
Okay, let's say a leading player. How's that? He might not be the biggest, but he's a leading.
Okay, but I agree with you on the merits of the case. I mean, for sure. But I want to jump to
your point
the second
too.
point.
Yep.
Yeah. I've really been surprised actually at the Letitia James's comments, public comments and statements.
Here we go.
What you and I would call extrajudicial, meaning what she wants to say in her briefs and in the courtroom on the record, that's almost all fair play. What I have a problem with is the statements that Letitia James has made, on the courthouse steps. Those have been sort of benign. She's given press conferences and she just says, okay, she says.
Very important, but at the same time, Karen Friedman Agnifilo responds by saying that, well, Trump has these press events right outside the courthouse, right outside the courtroom, and therefore Letitia James should have an opportunity to respond. Because remember, Letitia James was out there for several weeks actually doing press conferences on the steps of the courthouse. And if you actually look at the facts here, I think there were a few instances where Alina Habba came out and spoke, but by and large, Trump's lawyers refused to make any statements. It was all President Trump out there in front of the courthouse, in front of the courtroom, actually, just making statements.
The truth will prevail and this and that. More problematically is her tweets, public statements. While this case is going, and she really saves her fire for the days when the Trumps are testifying, she's tweeting explicitly, they're lying, they're liars on the stand. Maybe they are, okay? But what would happen to you or me in a criminal, I know it's not a criminal case, but let's start here. In a criminal case,
I mean, this kind of, it's hard to explain, but this is really the recipe for creating a lot of hatred among everyone involved in these huge cases. When these prosecutors start to act as if they're gods and they want to behave without regard to any of the rules whatsoever, any of the professional responsibility rules, and so unethically, where they're actively using the media to damage the litigation target that they're actually going after. It really erodes any trust I think that the public might have in the legal system when they see cases like this play out. And I know this personally because this is the kind of shit they do to me all the time.
Or let's take it a civil case. How about a civil case done by the U.S. Attorney's Office? What if Preet, when he was my U.S. attorney, while that case was happening?
Yeah, what if an AUSA did something like that? Eli Honig.
Would
they be disciplined by the bar? Would they?
Witnesses were on the stand was making extrajudicial statements, public statements outside of court saying, this witness who's testifying right now in our civil case is lying. He's a liar, and his whole family's liars. Case would be thrown out. Preet would get
That's not true.
Fired. Those two things would happen. Now, Letitia James.
That's like an ideal world situation, but if you're someone they don't like, well, then it's fine. It's totally okay.
This is different because she's elected, but I have a big problem with the statements she's been making during this trial. I'm not sure. Where are you on that?
Yeah, so look, this is something that we struggled with.
Okay, then there's some ridiculous response by Karen Friedman. I want to play this. Refresh it, play it from the very beginning.
Exposing right-wing misinformation. Oh, okay, nothing shady about that. Who funds them? They are partnered with an organization called Midas Touch. Now, Midas Touch describes itself as a, quote, producing the best pro-democracy political videos and content and include a political action committee. That's interesting, a super PAC. So here we have a shady Democratic media group who is finding these clips, funded by Silicon Valley billionaire and a Hollywood actor.
This is Breaking Points with Crystal Ball and what's-his-face, Sager. Pretty liberal, left-leaning podcast streaming channel, right? And they're going after the Midas Touch. They went after Joe Rogan a while back, and they're still actually going after Joe Rogan. If you look at their channel, I think they've recently released some hit pieces on Joe Rogan.
Actress, as well as a lot of other types. Now, as for the operation itself, let's look deeper. Midas Touch Group is run by three brothers, one of whom was once a social media manager for Ellen DeGeneres. Now, the group was a
It all makes sense now, doesn't it?
resistance media operation, which generated cringe clicks during the 2020 election. But
I had no idea that they were actually a super PAC. I mean, it's unbelievably corrupt. I mean, why not tell your viewers that every single time you do a stream? Yeah, we're a super PAC. We are committing election fraud every time we stream.
by 2021, even Rolling Stone magazine unveiled the effort as one that took millions.
Even Rolling Stone, the most pathetic liberal rag paper in the world. I mean, it used to be kind of respected when it would actually talk about music, but now they go after all kinds of people on the right, and they're going after the Midas Touch. It's the only time I've ever seen the Rolling Stone recently go after anyone associated with Democrats.
Millions of dollars from big donors and anti-Trump liberals, and appears to have dramatically oversold its influence. It's basically a blue Lincoln project.
It's a blue Lincoln project. So where are they getting all their funding? You know, they do have kind of slick produced streams. I'll give them that. And the only way that they can do that is if they have tons of money to pay producers, even if it's an Indian in Delhi or wherever, remotely logging in and producing the stream for them. It's a lot easier to focus on your stream of consciousness and talk, I've noticed, because I produce, this amateur shit stream. And I've had to learn as I go. And this is a very, very shitty stream, this stream. And so it's like, where are they paying these people from? Where is their source of funding? Is it like there's no transparency whatsoever? So they're just lying to their viewers through their teeth. And I think we actually have another little clip here from, oh yeah, we have this. Let's play about 30 seconds of this. This is from Jimmy Dore, and Jimmy Dore is interviewing Alex Jones.
And I forget the exact name. If you want, I'll Google it.
It's not the ones that try to do Rogan, is it? The scumbag Midas Touch, Misless Brothers. That's the ones who got that thing going at Rogan, the big N-word Spotify controversy because he mentioned ivermectin. That's those guys.
Yeah, I don't want to get into inside.
Wow. And so everybody hates Midas Touch. Got it. Okay. Let's play this.
Good morning. You're next.
Morning. This is Mr. I just want to refer that I'm a 92-year-old man, and I remember when Trump was in our village and talked to me personally. He was really a fan of Hitler. He said that dictatorship is not as bad as people think.
This is from Midas Touch.
One-man rule is better than having too many people trying to bring their opinion up. And that's
now,
the same thing.
Who knows if this is heavily edited and this is a voiceover, or they paid someone to do a prank call into C-SPAN. But I can tell you from the voice here, and maybe it doesn't show up that well in the stream, the caller here, whoever it is, does not sound like they're 92 years old. And we'll play it again just so you can observe.
Sunday, he believes that dictatorship is the best thing for this country. And sooner or later, you're going to wake up.
It sounds like someone in their 50s or 60s.
He'll become a dictator. So America, be aware. And I'll say goodbye to America. Hello.
Good morning. You're next.
Morning. This is Mr. I just want to refer that I'm a 92-year-old man, and I remember when Trump's father was in our village and talked to me personally. He was really a fan of Hitler. He said that dictatorship is not as bad as people think. He says one-man rule is better than having too many people trying to bring their opinion up. And that was the same thing his son did. He believes that dictatorship is the best thing for this country. And sooner or later, you're going to wake up and believe when he becomes president, he'll become a dictator. So America, be aware. And I'll say goodbye to America. Hello.
Unbelievable. Speaking of unbelievable, the U.S. is bringing back the Gerald R. Ford from the Mediterranean. Why would they do that? Because they want the price of oil to skyrocket. And this aircraft carrier, I think, was deployed out there in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. And there's really no reason, unless it's being replaced by another aircraft carrier out there, there's really no reason that it should actually be brought back. Again, they're trying to create the conditions for World War III here. Lloyd Austin gives nothing in the way of, providing any explanation why this is actually being retracted and returned back to the U.S. I'm just going through everything here. Make sure we have it. Let me look at my bookmarks here. This is probably a good meme video for 2024. Oh, I can't see it. Let me zoom out a little bit.
Oh my God.
All right. We should probably expect 2024 to go something like that. I wish Agent X was called in here. He was given the link, but he's been so shy lately. I would love the analysis on the Taiwan invasion. And I know that he loves talking about that. But, you know, it's interesting to think of, you know, what we can do in this country in the event that China does invade Taiwan. And I want to discuss, I think the initial impact will be on the financial markets. And I think that it would be the first sort of attack on the dollar. The dollar would suddenly become less valuable, probably, and we would see a recession in this country pretty quickly. I mean, we're already in a recession, honestly, but I think that we would get closer and closer to maybe even a depression in this country. But practically speaking, beyond just the abstract, the vagueness of all that, I think, you know, buying computers right now, chips are going to be increasingly difficult to come by because, as we know, most of those chips are actually produced in Taiwan. And so, yeah, get your old computers working. Buy new computers if you're capable of doing so. And, you know, ham radios. Always good to get a bug out spot ready to go with like an old RV. Because I think that the two-front global war, it's actually a three-front global war right now with if China were to invade Taiwan, that is. Because we have the Ukraine situation, we have the Israeli situation, and then we would have the Asia Pacific Rim, where we would be deploying a bunch of military forces over there, as well as into Poland/Ukraine. And then you would have some resources devoted to helping Israel level Gaza right now, which I forgot to mention, actually. I should bring this up. It is the judicial reform stuff in Israel, which did not pass. Let's see if we can see this on the stream. Headline for this article is Israel's judicial reform law that sparked months of nationwide protests struck down by court. And Netanyahu, who wanted to curtail the the power of the judiciary in Israel had been a major proponent of this package. And because of the fact that it was just struck down, I think it was narrowly struck down too by one vote on the Israeli Supreme Court. It was 8-7. I think they have 13 justices. Could be wrong. Remember, though, Netanyahu wanted a way out of the mass protests that were enveloping Israel prior to October 7th. And many of those protests, by and large, stemmed from this judicial reform situation, where apparently the liberals in the country were very fearful that Netanyahu wanted to push through major changes to government, but they were constantly being struck down by this left-leaning liberal Israeli Supreme Court, which has the constitutional power to strike down any law that is provisioned by the Knesset, the legislative body in Israel. So essentially, their Congress. And so the judiciary wanted effectively equal power in Israel and has maintained that power. And as we've seen with most legal systems in various countries, the judiciary will never give up power. So this was bound to fail from the very start that this actually began. So at the outset, when Netanyahu tried to do this, really, maybe the only way out of this is war. And that's exactly what Netanyahu did. And still, just got a notification here. The other thing here is that destroyed my train of thought. There's too many notifications, too many pop-ups. What happened to the vintage days of computing and the internet when we didn't have anything known as a pop-up modal? Or even if we did, unless you were searching like whereas sites or whatever, you wouldn't be getting just tons of pop-ups or notifications, these push notifications. And it seems like it's kind of like this digital pollution that we have. Anyways, I'm ranting and I'm getting sidetracked. The only way out for Netanyahu from this situation was war, and he took the country to war. And I truly believe that, again, this is just intuition. I'm basing this on everything that I've seen, that they allowed it to happen. They allowed October 7th to happen as a way out of all these protests. And the Mossad was, what's the term? They were sparking a lot of the protests and so forth. For what reasons, I'm not sure. And maybe other people out there could have a better analysis than me. But they were definitely lighting the flames of some of these protests. And I think knowing that, Netanyahu thought, and he had, remember, the Mossad had a bunch of intelligence on Hamas and Hezbollah activity. And he had previously funded some of the stability initiatives of Hamas to try and steer them away from mass militarization, which either backfired or it was deliberate. Who really knows? But what we do know is that I think Netanyahu, especially given the fact that, again, he is, I think he's indicted too, right? For a bunch of bribery and corruption. So, and it's been this sort of like long-going trial that he's been under. And I don't even think it's reached trial yet, but he's been indicted for a long time. So he's basically at war with the country's legal system. And if you put someone back in the seat of government when they have that much pressure on them, and you have an entire legal system trying to put him in prison, of course he's going to take the country to war. Of course. Makes perfect sense, because that's the only way out. And you notice how Netanyahu isn't ceding any territory in Gaza. He is just leveling the place because he wants this to continue for as long as possible, because the longer this war takes place, the longer it goes on, that means the less time that he will have to deal with the entire indictment process, the longer time that he will be the acting prime minister in Israel. So if you really think about it from that perspective, and it's sort of like this sociopathic, narcissistic attitude that he, again, you never really know what other people are thinking. I'm not saying that I do. But if you think about it, if you try and get in his head and understand where he's coming from, I think that probably makes the most sense. Of course, there could be other reasons as well that we just don't know about. Okay. Well, unless my anonymous sources have any other material, I am going to close the stream down, and we will look for tomorrow the Epstein list being released. Now, I'm not sure when that's actually going to be released. I'm checking on that right now. It is ordered to be released after January 1st. And so court opens tomorrow at like 8 or 8:30, right? So 8 o'clock in the morning. The clerk for the Southern District of New York will be probably releasing that on a public website, and it will be reported everywhere. So I think that I will probably be streaming tomorrow at that time, and we'll go over the list. In the meantime, I hope you have a great start of your week, and I will see you later. Bye.
Thanks for watching Command HQ with Brooke and Agent X. We'll see you next time.